If you are familiar with the One Piece fandom, the chances are you've been exposed to various power scaling takes on who the strongest character in One Piece really is. No matter what type of fan you ask, you will get all sorts of answers on who the #1 strongest character is, ranging from people using titles like the world's strongest to tell you Whitebeard or Kaido, or Oda's habit of withholding characters for the climax of the final saga to tell you that Emu or Dragon are the strongest characters. But the truth that everybody seems to avoid is that there is already a determined strongest character in the One Piece universe, established by Eiichiro Oda himself. And his name is Red-Haired Shanks. You're not mishearing me, I truly believe Red-Haired Shanks is the strongest character of all time in One Piece. Not just the present day pirates, but throughout the entire history of the One Piece world. Now, to most of you, that will sound like a blasphemous claim, but I promise you, if you watch this entire video to the end, a majority of you will come to agree with what I have to say, and will realize that Shanks is the strongest character of all time. Welcome to the Red-Haired Shanks analysis. This video is going to be structured into 5 different parts, all analyzing Shanks in the story of One Piece, coming to the conclusion of how he is the strongest character of all time, and they are in chronological order of build-up, so make sure you don't skip through any parts. First, we'll be talking about the portrayal of Shanks throughout the story through the lens of other characters. Then second, we'll be talking about Shanks' actual power scaling feats, about his matchups with other characters in the series. Then we'll talk about what people are missing the most, in how Oda himself believes Shanks is the strongest character of all time. Right after that, even more importantly, we'll talk about how the unique power system in One Piece enables Oda to make this claim and create a character as powerful as Shanks. And to end it off, we'll talk about why Shanks is even more powerful than characters like Roger, Joy Boy, or Emu, who most people would think Shanks is not as strong as. Again, I truly believe if you watch this entire video to the end, some of you will end up agreeing with exactly what I have to say, but I do understand there are going to be those of you who absolutely disagree with anything having to do with Shanks being the strongest. All I can ask from you is to leave a like and subscribe. Even if you disagree, all I really want is some good discourse and discussion in the comment section, talking about One Piece, my favorite series ever. When you first start One Piece, it's not uncommon to believe Shanks is the mentor-like figure to Luffy, similar to characters like Kakashi or Gojo in their respective series, or more broadly, just the character who's supposed to teach the main character the power system and act as sort of a father figure. And while I do think Shanks does have some of those qualities, he's not exactly this archetype of character for a specific reason. That reason being, he has very scarce appearances in the manga, and only has impact on the story in very rare occurrences. However, despite there being very few appearances of Shanks, each and every time he appears in the story, there is an enormous wave of impact and effect that he has on the narrative, and it is absolutely impossible to ignore the enormous presence he has on screen. The first and most obvious example of this, which we'll also be talking about in the power scaling section, is when we see Shanks visit Whitebeard's boat. By this time in the story, Whitebeard has already been established as the world's strongest pirate via the narrator, yet Oda goes out of his way to show us Shanks making a show of power on Whitebeard's boat, knocking out all of his subordinates and showing no fear in the face of the man closest to becoming the king of the pirates, in Whitebeard. There are scenes before this one where we can sort of infer that Shanks is a very strong character, like his meeting with Mihawk right after Zoro's defeated by Mihawk, but this meeting with Whitebeard is very easily the first time the reader realizes the league that Shanks is in, and that he's not just some other pirate that Luffy happened to meet. The man is in the top echelon of characters in the entire One Piece universe. Like I mentioned before, this is a deliberate choice from Oda to show the reader that Shanks means business. It was no coincidence that Whitebeard was just previously established as the strongest character in the series, at least in title or by the One Piece populace's opinion, just to then have Oda send Shanks to his territory and show absolutely no mercy to any of his subordinates. But what's incredibly important to remember from this scene instead of this display of power is what Shanks comes to talk to Whitebeard about, which is protecting Ace from Blackbeard. The most important thing to take out of this meeting, which is a theme we will be touching on throughout the course of this video, so it's important to remember, is that Shanks only ever acts out of self-defense or protection for his allies, and that is exactly why he comes to Whitebeard's boat with such a strong display of power. It's because he means business in protecting Ace, Whitebeard's son. The next insane display of portrayal from Shanks is when he comes to stop the Marineford War, for a very similar reason to the one he went to Whitebeard's boat for. Again, self-defense and protecting his allies. He wanted to stop the war to prevent any more needless deaths. If you go back and rewatch this scene, again, it is a deliberate choice from Oda to include such a wide range of reactions from characters at Marineford reacting to Shanks' arrival. Yes, of course, any arrival of any other Yonko at Marineford during this war would have probably shocked the entire world as much as Shanks did. However, again, the deliberate choice from Oda to include these reactions and to give Shanks such a large impact on the events happening at the war at the time is no coincidence. These type of scenes only go to Shanks, and the fact that he only has these scenes when he's acting for self-defense is a huge point for his character that again we'll be touching on later. Now's probably a good time to mention Mihawk. Normally when I'm debating Shanks versus Mihawk, one of my biggest points is that Mihawk had zero presence at Marineford, and Shanks' arrival absolutely paused the entire war. However, in this video, I'm not going to talk too much about Shanks versus Mihawk. If you want to know why I still think Shanks is stronger than Mihawk, despite Shanks being a swordsman and Mihawk still being the strongest swordsman, yes, I think both of those are true, you can check out this video where I talk about those two in depth. After Marineford, we miss out on Shanks for quite a bit, only getting small glimpses of his crew reacting to Luffy's growth, but that's followed up by a gigantic moment in Wano where Shanks comes to stop Green Bull from picking on the people who just took down Kaido and Big Mom. Forgive me if I sound like a broken record, but it's important to realize, again, that Shanks is acting out of defense here, attempting to protect the people who are battle-torn from fighting Kaido and Big Mom, as he wants to make sure the new era has a chance to grow and celebrate their large victory. We'll be talking more about this moment in the power scaling section. I just wanted to mention another instance of Shanks acting out of selflessness for his allies. And finally, another one we'll be talking about in depth in the power scaling section is when Shanks defeats Kid in one shot at Elbaf. Now, there's a whole lot we can get from this moment specifically when it comes to Shanks' power levels, but for the very last time in this section, I want to talk about, again, how Shanks acts out of defense here for his weak allies in order to save them from Kid, who is about to destroy the entire fleet. This scene in particular is very special for Shanks' character because it's where Oda reveals to us that his Grand Fleet is notoriously weak for such a strong individual crew with the red-haired pirates. This scene does not surprise me at all because, as I'm sure you realize by now, Shanks' entire character is built on the defense of his friends, so it is no surprise that his entire Grand Fleet is weak. The entire reason they're in his Grand Fleet in the first place is for the protection they get under his banner. So, those are the biggest moments where Shanks has such a large impact on the story, and it's very clear that Oda is trying to portray him in a certain way. Again, the selfless defense of his allies and protection of his friends, which is going to be very important later on in this video. But before that, let's get into the nitty-gritty power scaling section of this video, talking about the ins and outs of what kind of strength Shanks actually has. The first moment we realize Shanks is such a strong character is, like I mentioned previously, his meeting with Whitebeard. Whitebeard had just been established as the strongest pirate, and for Shanks to clash evenly and split the sky with him was such a big deal that we didn't even realize how big of a deal it was at the time. Now, because this moment was so early on into the story, and it's possible Oda didn't really have a grasp on what he wanted Haki to be yet, this is sort of a loose claim, but the fact that Shanks was literally putting cracks in Whitebeard's boat and knocking out Whitebeard's commanders with his Haki is absolutely incredible. This is a feat of Haki we have never seen before in the series, even up to the present chapter, and it is definitely not something to be slept on that he did this in the presence of Whitebeard. We see this level of strength again at Marineford. However, like I mentioned previously, Haki wasn't really a concept that was fully established at this point, so it's hard to identify how strong Shanks really was in pre-timeskip. But at the very least, we know he was able to stop Akainu very quickly, get to that point where Kobe was extremely quickly to save him, and also contain enough power in his crew alone to pause the war entirely. However, like I said, it's very hard to power scale pre-timeskip because Haki was not depicted, so let's get into the post-timeskip where we can really put a number on how strong Shanks is. The meme in the One Piece fandom where Shanks wasn't doing anything in the story and people would be waiting 20 years for him to do something finally ended when he stopped Green Bull at Wano with what people like to call Bluetooth Haki. Although this name is really funny, I actually don't think it's that far off. To be able to scare an admiral out of fighting somebody from miles away from the shore on his boat is again a Haki feat that absolutely no one in the story has been able to replicate, apart from maybe Joy Boy's not Haki, which we will get into at the end of this video in the last part. But that's not even the strongest display of Haki we see from Shanks. It's arguably even stronger that his observation Haki was able to detail Kid destroying his entire fleet probably around 20 seconds before it actually happened, in the biggest display of observation Haki we've seen in the entire story, even stronger than Katakuri, Kaido, and Luffy, the only other confirmed users of advanced observation Haki. Because this is the first moment where we see Shanks fight, it has a treasure trove of information for us on how strong Shanks actually is. Apart from the observation Haki I just mentioned, the speed at which Shanks is able to jump from his boat to where Kid is almost instant, again one of the strongest displays of speed we see in the entire story. But the real kicker here is what he does to Kid, and there's something not a lot of people are talking about that I want to bring attention to when it comes to how impressive it is to one-shot Kid. People forget that one arc prior, Kid was tanking punches from Big Mom for a very long amount of time, and Big Mom is a Yonko with advanced Conqueror's Haki. Kid ended the fight with Big Mom alive and conscious, despite being the most beat up out of anyone on that floor of Onigashima without any contest. And yet, Shanks was able to defeat Kid in one named attack. A singular named attack knocked out one of the most durable characters in the series that we had seen prior to this point, someone who was able to withstand Big Mom's wrath for hours upon hours on end. Now, it's not fair for me to say Shanks one-tapped Kid entirely. There is an argument to be had that Kid was not prepared for this attack, and also had his own cannon explosion blow up in his face. However, I still think even with these two things happening, it is still incredibly impressive for Shanks to be able to defeat Kid in one shot. At this point in the video, you're probably wondering to yourself, okay, these are all reasons why Shanks is very strong, and I agree with them, but none of these mean he's the #1 strongest of all time, and I'm not really convinced yet. Well then, let's get into why Oda himself is establishing Shanks as the #1 strongest character of all time. When I say Oda is establishing Shanks as the #1 strongest character of all time, I don't exactly mean Oda came out and said, Shanks is the strongest character of all time. It's more that he's sending us that message through the narrative of the story and the writing of his characters. What I've been saying the most in this video is about to become very important. The fact that Shanks only acts out of self-defense and the protection of his allies. The reason this is so important, and the way that Oda is using this fact to tell us that Shanks is the strongest character of all time, is because Shanks is establishing the moral compass of the story. One Piece is not exactly a morally gray story. There's not a lot of villains you can empathize with who you sort of understand why they're doing evil things. There's a very clear good and bad in One Piece, and what Oda uses to establish that moral compass, in order to solidify for the readers what is the true good that we should be following as an audience, is that he imparts that moral compass into Shanks. Shanks is the literal guideline or blueprint for what the best moral compass, the best ethics, and the correct morality for a character are in One Piece. Shanks is literally a self-insert from Oda to show the readers what it means to be the best you can be as a character in the One Piece world. Now that might sound pretty confusing, so let me break it down. The simplest way I can do that is talking about Luffy. The most consistent thing about Luffy throughout the entirety of One Piece, apart from him always being hungry, is that he always wants to protect his friends no matter what, and that is where his source of strength always comes from. Luffy is always able to come out on top of any scenario because of his extreme desire to protect his friends. Because Luffy's the main character, and that's exactly how he acts, the desire to protect your friends no matter what is the established good of the story's morality that is undeniable for the reader to follow. And where does Luffy get that mentality? He adopted it from Shanks all the way back in chapter 1, where Shanks does anything to protect his friends and only acts out of self-defense for those he loves. Shanks was literally created for the story of One Piece to show both Luffy and the reader what the purest form of good is for the moral compass of the One Piece world. He is literally Oda's golden boy, the self-insert who is supposed to teach the readers what it is to be a positive masculine figure for all the kids reading One Piece, and also at the time, Luffy, who was a kid. I still think we're in a realm where everyone watching this video agrees with me. I don't think it's very debatable that Shanks is a self-insert from Oda to show the audience, as well as Luffy, what it is to be a pure good person. But how does that make him the strongest character of all time? Well, it's thanks to One Piece's extremely unique power system. This is what people miss the most when it comes to Shanks' strength. A lot of people can agree that he's one of the strongest characters of all time. A lot of people can agree that he's the morally best character in the story, and insert from Oda as the golden child. But what people miss is the connection to power scaling that this statement has. One Piece is so incredibly unique with his power system, referring to Haki of course, because it is one of the only stories in fiction where your morality, your sense of justice, your ethical values, and your will and spirit to protect your friends in the purest form can directly translate to your strength, because all of those things make up your spirit, and what is your spirit? It literally manifests into Haki. This is exactly why all of the power scaling moments I mentioned are extreme feats of Haki and nothing else, because Shanks is an absolute Haki monster. This is something all One Piece fans can agree on. Shanks has one of the highest portrayals of Haki throughout the entire story. And why is that? That's what people miss the most. The reason why Shanks is such an incredibly strong character due to his Haki is because his Haki is so strong thanks to his perfect morals that Oda created as the guideline for the people watching the story. You can even trace this down to why Luffy is able to defeat villains in the first place. It's because his intentions are so pure that his Haki is so strong, and he's able to defeat people with malice intent like Doflamingo and Kaido. Of course, there can be evil forms of will, which is why characters like Kaido have such a strong Haki. Kaido is filled with so much malice and regret in his life that it manifests into such strong Haki, but at the end of the day, in the shonen story we love called One Piece, the character with the strongest Haki is going to be the one with the most correct morals, the strongest will to protect their friends, the character who Luffy got those ideals from in the first place, red-haired Shanks. You see this throughout the entirety of One Piece. Characters with different intentions have different types of Haki, aiding their strength in whatever they want to do, and the reason why every time Shanks appears on screen, he is mentioned as a Haki monster by all the dialogue around him, is because of his morals playing into that strength. The reason why his Haki is so strong is because Oda created him as a character to be the very embodiment of what it means to be morally correct in One Piece. And that is exactly why Luffy will be able to surpass Shanks and become the strongest character at the end of the story, because he shares that exact same moral compass as Shanks does, while also possessing a devil fruit that identifies with those same morals, the Nika fruit of freedom. Those two things combined with Luffy's growth at the end of the story will turn Luffy into the strongest character of all time. That is a story for another time. Until that point, the person who created these morals for Luffy, the person who was created for One Piece to act as the guideline for the readers and the main character, is the strongest character of all time, because those ideals are literally part of the structure of power scaling in One Piece, the power system of Haki, and that is exactly why Shanks' Haki is so strong, because of his morals. But we still have one more section left to talk about why Shanks is more powerful than characters like Emu or Joy Boy, especially Joy Boy, who might have shared those exact morals that I'm talking about, the will to protect his friends. Well, there's one more thing about Shanks' power that we're missing that I'm about to talk about. The thing we're missing is confidence. Confidence and knowledge is also an incredibly important part of Haki that I didn't talk about previously, because it is what sets apart Shanks from characters like Roger and Joy Boy, who many people believe to be stronger than Shanks. However, what Shanks has over these two characters, and even Emu himself, is that Shanks has known from a very young age how everything was going to play out in the One Piece story. When you talk about Joy Boy, yes, it is very possible he was one of the strongest characters of all time, but at the end of the day, he lost. Joy Boy was not able to accomplish his goal, he was defeated by the world government, and reduced to a legend only few know the name of. The same could be said about Roger. Although Roger went out on his own terms and didn't really have much confrontation with the world government, when Roger reached the One Piece, he realized that he was too early and he wasn't the destined one to free the world. That's what sets these two characters apart from Shanks, who again, because he was sailing on Roger's boat and was exposed to the truth of the world from a very young age, has known the truth of what everything will play out to be in the One Piece universe for pretty much ever. I think this is exactly why he cried when he talked to Roger in this scene, despite us not knowing what was said. I think Roger here was pretty much explaining what the One Piece was, that him nor Shanks would be the chosen one, that Shanks' lineage is of the enemy, and that someone in the future will come to liberate the world. This is exactly why this scene of Shanks and Buggy hits me so hard, and I'm surprised not many people were talking about it. I think the reason why Shanks gives up on becoming the next king of the pirates, leading to Buggy abandoning him, is because of that conversation with Roger, he understands that someone in the future is supposed to take up that mantle, and it is not him. Unlike Joy Boy and unlike Roger, Shanks does not have the misconception that he's the one who's going to free the world. He doesn't have this false confidence that everything weighs upon his shoulders, which is likely the reason why Roger and Joy Boy failed. Shanks understands that his role is the facilitator of the next generation in order to foster the person who's supposed to come, take Roger's will, take Joy Boy's will, and free the world from Emu. Again, it is because of this understanding that Shanks' haki is so strong. He knows what his role is, he's confident in the world being freed via Luffy's hand and not his, and from a very young age, he knew exactly how everything was going to play out. The only argument left is Emu. It is hard to argue that Shanks is stronger than Emu because Emu is such a mysterious character with such a seemingly outer-worldly power, not related to haki or devil fruits. However, there is 2 reasons why I think Shanks is stronger than Emu. The first is related to what I just mentioned in confidence. As we know from the end of Egghead Island, Emu is traumatized by whatever Joy Boy did during the Void Century, and because the world government is now stocking up on soldiers and preparing for a final war, it is very clear that Emu is a little bit shaken up at the state of the world and is nervous at Luffy's advancements. The second reason I think Shanks is stronger than Emu is because of the effect that Joy Boy's haki had on Emu. I've pretty much spent this entire video explaining why Shanks is stronger than Joy Boy, and if Joy Boy's haki was able to dispel the Gorosei and send Emu into a fit, I think Shanks' haki would likely have the same effect. We even see a direct explanation for this in the story with Dorian Bragi immediately thinking of red-haired Shanks' haki when Joy Boy's haki knocks the Gorosei back to Marijua. Yes, I do know that Dorian Bragi in this panel are talking about how this haki is even stronger than Shanks's. However, to this, I say it's very likely that Dorian Bragi haven't been exposed to Shanks' true strength, considering he would never have a reason to protect those two because they're strong in their own right, and also he'd never have a reason to fight them as an opposition, showing them how strong he really is. What's important from this panel is that they say there's absolutely no hostility to this haki, which is the reason why it was so strong, and again, for probably the millionth time this video, that is exactly why Shanks' haki is so strong, because he is not hostile at all. He only acts out of self-defense, the protection of his allies, and he was inserted into the story to instill those values in both Luffy and the reader. And that is why Shanks is the strongest character of all time. Haki is the most important power in the One Piece universe. It directly correlates to a character's morals and ethics, and the character with the most pure form of moral and ethics, the character with absolutely no hostility, who was created to impart those values into Luffy and the reader, is red-haired Shanks, the strongest character of all time. Now, despite all that, I do still think Shanks will die in the end of the story, most likely to the hands of Blackbeard. Does that mean Blackbeard becomes the strongest character of all time? I don't think so. Although 3 Devil Fruits might be such an absurd amount of power that it overpowers this morally correct haki I'm talking about, I do think Shanks will most likely die an Obi-Wan Kenobi type of death if you have seen Star Wars, where he sort of sacrifices himself to spur on Luffy to go and liberate the world, knowing that his role has been completed, and he'll probably die stronger than Blackbeard is my guess, but I know a lot of people would disagree with me on that. If you watched this video all the way through, I seriously appreciate you. I don't know if there's many people who can match my enthusiasm about Shanks, so I really appreciate it. If you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. And if you want more full, long character analysis like this, let me know in the comments what character you want me to make a video about. This is actually a lot of fun, and I like really deep diving into one character specifically. Or if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you think everything I said in this video is incorrect, I still want to know what you think. Who do you think the strongest character in One Piece is? Why do you think everything that I said is false? I'm curious about other opinions. Just don't be too crazy on me, you know, it's just One Piece. Thank you for watching, and until next time.